Maegor, the first of his name, came to the throne after the sudden death of his brother, King Aenys, in the year 42 AC. He is better remembered as Maegor the Cruel, and it was a well-earned sobriquet, for no crueler king ever sat the Iron Throne. His reign began with blood and ended in blood as well. His name still echoes through the halls of Westeros, feared and despised for the bloodshed he left in his wake. King Aegon I Targaryen took both of his sisters to wife. Aenys and Visenya were dragon riders with silver gold hair, purple eyes, and the beauty of true Targaryens. But apart from that, the two queens were as unlike each other as any two women could be, save in one other respect. Each of them gave the king a son. Aenys came first. Born in 7 AC to Aegon's younger wife, Rhaenys, the boy was small at birth and sickly. He cried all the time, and it was said that his limbs were spindly, his eyes small and watery, and that the king's maesters feared for his survival. This lack of strength, unlike his father, made many people think that he was, in truth, the bastard son of one of Queen Rhaenys' many handsome favorites, perhaps the son of a singer, mummer, or a mime. The prince was slow to grow as well. Not until he was given the young dragon Quicksilver, a hatchling born that same year on Dragonstone, did Aenys Targaryen begin to thrive. However, Prince Aenys was 3 when his mother, Queen Rhaenys, and her dragon Meraxes were slain in Dorne. Her death left the boy prince inconsolable. He stopped eating and even began to crawl as he had when he was 1, as if he had forgotten how to walk. His father despaired of him, and rumors flew about the court that King Aegon might take another wife, as Rhaenys was dead and Visenya was childless and perhaps barren. The king kept his own counsel on these matters, so no man could say what thoughts he might have entertained, but many great lords and noble knights appeared at court with their maiden daughters, each more comely than the last. All such speculation ended in 11 AC when Queen Visenya suddenly announced that she was carrying the king's child. A son, she proclaimed confidently, and so he proved to be. The half-brothers were never close. Prince Aenys was the heir apparent, and King Aegon kept him close to his side. As the king moved about the realm from castle to castle, so did the prince. Prince Maegor remained with his brother, sitting by her side when she held court. Queen Visenya and King Aegon were oft apart in those years. When he was not on a royal progress, Aegon would return to King's Landing and the Aegon Fort, while Visenya and her son remained on Dragonstone. For this reason, lords and commons alike began to refer to Maegor as the Prince of Dragonstone. Alyssa gave birth to a daughter. Prince Aenys named her Rhaena in honor of his mother. Like her father, the girl was small at birth, but unlike him, she proved to be a happy, healthy child, with lively lilac eyes and hair that shone like beaten silver. It was written that King Aegon himself wept for the first time his granddaughter was placed in his arms, and thereafter doted upon the child, perhaps in some part because she reminded him of his lost queen, Rhaenys, in whose memory she had been named. Prince Aenys was the unquestioned heir to the Iron Throne, all agreed, but now an issue arose as to whether Prince Maegor remained second in the line of succession or should be considered to have fallen to third behind the newborn princess. Queen Visenya proposed to settle the matter by betrothing the infant Rhaena to Maegor, who had just turned 11. Aenys and Alyssa spoke against the match, however, and when word reached the Starry Sept, the High Septon sent a raven warning the king that such a marriage would not be looked upon with favor by the faith. His High Holiness proposed a different bride for Maegor, his own niece, Cerise Hightower, maiden daughter of the Lord of Oldtown, Manfred Hightower. King Aegon, mindful of the advantages of closer ties with Oldtown and its ruling house, saw wisdom in the choice and agreed to the match. Thus it came to pass that in 25 AC, Maegor Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, wed Lady Cerise Hightower in the Starry Sept of Oldtown, with the High Septon himself performing the nuptials. Maegor was 13, the bride 10 years his senior, but the lords who bore witness to the bedding all agreed that the prince made a lusty husband, and Maegor himself boasted that he had consummated the marriage a dozen times that night. The son came the next year, but the boy, named Aegon after his grandsire, was born to Lady Alyssa and fathered by Prince Aenys. While many still debated whether Prince Maegor or his niece, Rhaena, should have precedence in the order of succession, it seemed beyond question that Aegon would follow his father Aenys just as Aenys would follow Aegon. Princess Rhaena's love for her siblings and the realm's joy at each new Targaryen princeling was not shared by Prince Maegor or his mother, Queen Visenya, for each new son born to Aenys pushed Maegor further down in the line of succession, and there were still those who claimed he stood behind Aenys' daughters as well. And all the while, Maegor himself remained childless, for Lady Cerise did not quicken in the years that followed their marriage. On tourney ground and battlefield, however, Prince Maegor's accomplishments far exceeded those of his brother. In the great tourney at Riverrun in 28 AC, Maegor unhorsed 3 knights of the Kingsguard in successive tilts before falling to the eventual champion. In the melee, no man could stand before him. Afterward, he was knighted on the field by his father, who dubbed him with no less a blade than Blackfire. At 10 and 6, Maegor became the youngest knight in the Seven Kingdoms. Other feats followed. In 29 AC and again in 30 AC, Maegor accompanied Osmond Strong and Aethan Valerian to the Stepstones to root out the Lycene pirate king Sargozo San, and fought in several bloody affairs, showing himself to be both fearless and deadly. In 31 AC, he hunted down and slew a notorious robber knight in the Riverlands, the so-called Giant of the Trident. Maegor was not yet a dragon rider, however. Though a dozen hatchlings had been born amidst the fires of Dragonstone in the later years of Aegon's reign and were offered to the prince, he refused them all. When his young niece Rhaena, in only her 12th year, took to the sky astride Dreamfire, Maegor's failure became the talk of King's Landing. Lady Alyssa teased him about it one day in court, wondering aloud whether "my good brother is afraid of dragons." Prince Maegor darkened in rage at the jape, then replied coolly that there was only one dragon worthy of him. The last 7 years of the reign of Aegon the Conqueror were peaceful ones. Aegon the Conqueror died of a stroke on Dragonstone in the 37th year after the conquest. The king was clad in battle armor, his mailed hands folded over the hilt of Blackfire. Since the days of old Valyria, it had ever been the custom of House Targaryen to burn their dead rather than consigning their remains to the ground. Vhagar supplied the flames to light the fire. Blackfire was burned with the king, but retrieved by Maegor afterward, its blade darker but otherwise unharmed. No common fire can damage Valyrian steel. Aenys had been at Highgarden on his progress when his father died, but Quicksilver returned him to Dragonstone for the funeral. Afterward, he donned his father's iron and ruby crown, and Grand Maester Gawain proclaimed him Aenys of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. The lords who had come to Dragonstone to bid their king farewell knelt and bowed their heads. When Prince Maegor's turn came, Aenys drew him back to his feet, kissed his cheek, and said, "Brother, you need never kneel to me again. We shall rule this realm together, you and I." Then the king presented his father's sword, Blackfire, to his brother, saying, "You are more fit to bear this blade than I. Wield it in my service, and I shall be content." At the Starry Sept, the High Septon anointed Aenys Targaryen, as his predecessor had once anointed his father, and presented him with a crown of yellow gold, with the faces of the seven inlaid in jade and pearl. Yet even as Aenys was receiving the blessing of the Father of the Faithful, others were casting doubt on the fitness to sit the Iron Throne. Westeros required a warrior, they whispered to one another, and Maegor was plainly the stronger of the dragon's 2 sons. Foremost amongst the whisperers was the Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen. "The truth is plain enough," she is reported to have said. "Even Aenys sees it. Why else would he have given Blackfire to my son? He knows that only Maegor has the strength to rule." The new king's mettle would be tested sooner than anyone could have imagined. The wars of conquest had left scars throughout the realm. Sons now come of age dreamt of avenging long-dead fathers. Knights remembered the days when a man with a sword, a horse, and a suit of armor could slash his way to riches and glory. Lords recalled a time when they did not need a king's leave to tax their small folk or kill their enemies. The largest and most threatening rebellion remained that of the Vulture King along the Dornish marshes. Though Princess Daria continued to issue denunciations from Sunspear, there were many who suspected that she was playing a double game, for she did not take the field against the rebels and was rumored to be sending them men, money, and supplies. Whether that was true or not, hundreds of Dornish knights and several thousand seasoned spearmen had joined the Vulture King's rabble, and the rabble itself had swelled enormously to more than 30,000 men. So large had his host become that the Vulture King made an ill-considered decision and divided his strength. While he marched west against Nightstrong and Horn Hill with half the Dornish power, the other half went east to besiege Stonehelm, seat of House Swan. Both hosts met with disaster. Orys Baratheon, now known as Orys One Hand, rode forth from Storm's End one last time to smash the Dornish beneath the walls of Stonehelm. When Walter Will was delivered into his hands, wounded but alive, Lord Orys said, "Your father took my hand. I claim yours as repayment." So saying, he hacked off Lord Walter's sword hand. Then he took his other hand and both his feet as well, calling them his usury. Strange to say, Lord Baratheon died on the march back to Storm's End of the wounds he himself had taken during the battle, but his son Davos always said he died smiling at the rotting hands and feet that dangled in his tent like a string of onions. As for the rebel king himself, the man who called himself Vulture King was taken alive and tied naked between two posts by savage Sam Tarly. The singers like to say that he was torn to pieces by the very vultures from whom he took his style, but in truth he perished of thirst and exposure, and the birds did not descend on him until well after he was dead. In later years, several other men would take the title Vulture King, but whether they were of the same blood as the first, no man can say. His death is generally accounted as the end of the Second Dornish War, though that is somewhat of a misnomer, since no Dornish lords ever took the field, and Princess Daria continued to vilify the Vulture King until his end and took no part in his campaigns. The first of the rebels proved to be the last as well, but Harren the Red was at last brought to bay in a village west of the God's Eye. The outlaw king did not die meekly. In his last fight he slew the king's hand, Lord Alan Stokeworth, before being cut down by Stokeworth's squire, Bernard Brune. A grateful King Aenys conferred knighthood on Brune and rewarded Davos Baratheon, Samwell Tarly, No-Nose Dondarrion, Alan Caron, Allard Royce, and Goran Greyjoy with gold, offices, and honors. The greatest plaudits he bestowed on his own brother. On his return to King's Landing, Prince Maegor was hailed as a hero. King Aenys embraced him before a cheering throng and named him Hand of the King, and when two young dragons hatched amidst the fire pits of Dragonstone at the end of that year, it was taken for a sign, but the amity between the dragon sons did not long endure. It may be that conflict was inevitable, for the two brothers had very different natures. King Aenys loved his wife, his children, and his people, and wished only to be loved in turn. Sword and lance had lost whatever appeal they ever had for him. Instead, his grace dabbled in alchemy, astronomy, and astrology, delighted in music and dance, wore the finest silks, samites, and velvets, and enjoyed the company of maesters, septons, and wits. His brother Maegor, taller, broader, and fearsomely strong, had no patience for any of that, but lived for war, tourneys, and battle. He was rightly regarded as one of the finest knights in Westeros, though his savagery in the field and his harshness toward defeated foes were oft remarked upon as well. King Aenys sought always to please. When faced with difficulties, he would answer with soft words, whereas Maegor's reply was ever steel and fire. Grand Maester Gawain wrote that Aenys trusted everyone, Maegor no one. The king was easily influenced influenced, Cowan observed, swaying this way and that like a reed in the wind, likely to heed whichever counselor last had his ear. Prince Maegor, on the other hand, was rigid as an iron rod, unyielding, unbending. Despite such differences, the Sons of the Dragon continued to rule together amicably for the better part of 2 years. But in 39 AC, Queen Alyssa gave King Aenys yet another heir, a girl she named Viella, who sadly died in the cradle not long after. Perhaps it was this continued proof of the queen's fertility that drove Prince Maegor to do what he did. Whatever the reason, the prince shocked the realm and the king both when he suddenly announced that Lady Cerise was barren, and he had therefore taken a second wife in Alice Harroway, daughter of the new Lord of Harrenhal. The wedding was performed on Dragonstone under the aegis of the Dowager Queen Visenya. As the castle septon refused to officiate, Maegor and his new bride were joined in a Valyrian rite, wed by blood and fire. The marriage took place without the leave, knowledge, or presence of King Aenys. When it became known, the two half-brothers quarreled bitterly. Nor was his grace alone in his wrath. Manfred Hightower, father of Lady Cerise, made protest to the king, demanding that Lady Alice be put aside. And in the Starry Sept at Old Town, the High Septon went even further, denouncing Maegor's marriage as sin and fornication, and calling the prince's new bride this whore of Harroway. No true son or daughter of the Seven would ever bow to such, he thundered. Prince Maegor remained defiant. His father had taken both of his sisters to wife, he pointed out. The strictures of the faith might rule lesser men, but not the blood of the dragon. No words of King Aenys could heal the wound his brother's words thus opened, and many pious lords throughout the Seven Kingdoms condemned the marriage and began to speak openly of Maegor's whore. Vexed and angry, King Aenys gave his brother a choice. Put Alice Harroway aside and return to Lady Cerise, or suffer 5 years of exile. Prince Maegor chose exile. In 40 AC, he departed for Pentos, taking Lady Alice, Balerion his dragon, and the sword Blackfire with him. It is said that Aenys requested his brother return Blackfire, to which Prince Maegor replied, "Your grace is welcome to try and take her from me." Lady Ceres was left abandoned in King's Landing. To replace his brother as Hand, King Aenys turned to Septon Myrmison, a pious cleric said to be able to heal the sick by the laying on the hands. No doubt his grace the king hoped the choice would appease the faith. If so, he was wrong. Septon Myrmison could no more heal the realm than he could make Ceres Hightower fecund. The High Septon continued to thunder, and all through the realm, the lords in their halls spoke of the king's weakness. How can he rule the Seven Kingdoms when he cannot even rule his brother? They said. The king remained oblivious to the discontent in the realm. Peace had returned, his troublesome brother was across the narrow sea, and a great new castle had begun to rise atop Aegon's high hill. Built all in pale red stone, the king's new seat would be larger and more lavish than Dragonstone, with massive walls and barbicans and towers capable of withstanding any enemy. The Red Keep, the people of King's Landing named it. Its building had become the king's obsession. "My descendants shall rule from here for 1,000 years, his grace declared. Perhaps thinking of those descendants, in 41 AC, Aenys Targaryen made a disastrous blunder and announced his intention to give the hand of his daughter Rhaena in marriage to her brother Aegon, heir to the Iron Throne. Aenys Targaryen was infamous for his indecision, yet here, faced with the fury of the faith, he stiffened and grew stubborn. The Dowager Queen Visenya advised him that he had but 2 choices. He must abandon the marriage and find new matches for his son and daughter, or mount his dragon Quicksilver to fly to Old Town to burn the Starry Sept down around the High Septon's head. King Aenys did neither. Instead, he simply persisted. On the day of the wedding, King Aenys compounded his misjudgment by granting the title of Prince of Dragonstone to his presumptuous heir, Prince Aegon. A hush fell over the hall at those words, for all present knew that the title had hitherto belonged to Prince Maegor. At the high table, Queen Visenya rose and stalked from the hall without the king's leave. That night she mounted Vhagar and returned to Dragonstone. Aenys Targaryen did not seem to comprehend the extent to which she had roused the realm against him. Eager to win back the favor of the small folk, he decreed that the prince and princess would make a royal progress through the realm, no doubt thinking of the cheers that had greeted him everywhere he went on his own progress. Wiser perhaps than her father, Princess Rhaena asked his leave to bring her dragon Dreamfire with them, but Aenys forbade it. As Prince Aegon had not yet ridden a dragon, the king feared that the lords and commons might think his son unmanly if they saw his wife on dragonback and him upon a palfrey. Elsewhere in the realm, matters went from bad to worse. Septon Myrmison, the king's hand, was expelled from the faith in punishment for performing forbidden nuptials, whereupon Aenys himself took quill in hand to write to the High Septon asking that his high holiness restore my good Myrmison, explaining the long history of brother-sister marriages in Old Valyria. The High Septon's reply was so venomous that his grace went pale when he read it. Far from relenting, the shepherd of the faithful addressed Aenys as King Abomination, declaring him to be a pretender and a tyrant with no right to rule the Seven Kingdoms. During that time, the High Septon was the true king of Westeros in all but name. The king, in turn, sent his newlywed children on a royal progress, minus Rhaena's dragon, but they were met with anger and jeers by the crowd, and the Septons stayed away. Lord Lucas Harroway even denied them entry into Harrenhal when they refused to acknowledge that his daughter, Alice, was Maegor's only legal wife. The High Septon also continued to escalate the conflict, expelling Septon Myrmison from holy orders and calling Aenys King Abomination in fiery sermons. And the faith militant took up arms. Within a fortnight, Myrmison was hacked to death by a group of poor fellows in King's Landing. Recognizing the threat within his city, Aenys located to Dragonstone, a wise choice. Even though he was but 35 years of age, he seemed to grow old overnight. His health improved briefly when Dowager Queen Visenya took over his care, but it collapsed again when he learned that his children were under siege in Craighall. The king died 3 days later and was committed to the flames of Dragonstone. Years afterward, however, it would be whispered that Visenya had poisoned the king, in part because she departed Dragonstone within the hour of his death and did not attend the funeral. But her true motives for that departure would shortly become apparent. Maegor descended on Dragonstone only long enough to claim the crown. Not the ornate golden crown Aenys had favored with its images of the Seven, but the iron crown of their father, set with its blood-red rubies. His mother placed it on his head, and the lords and knights gathered there knelt as he proclaimed himself Maegor of House Targaryen, first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. Only Grand Maester Gawain dared object. By all the laws of inheritance, laws that the Conqueror himself had affirmed after the conquest, the Iron Throne should pass to King Aenys' son Aegon, the aged Maester said. The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it, Maegor replied, whereupon he decreed the immediate execution of the Grand Maester, taking off Gawain's old grey head himself with a single swing of Blackfire. 100 ravens flew within a day. The next day, Maegor flew as well. Mounting Balerion, he crossed Blackwater Bay to King's Landing, accompanied by the Dowager Queen Visenya upon Vagar. The return of the dragons set off riots in the city, as hundreds tried to flee only to find the gates closed and barred. The Targaryens raised their standards atop Visenya's hill and called for leal men to gather to them. Thousands did. Visenya Targaryen proclaimed that her son Maegor had come to be their king. A true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man questions my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body. The warrior's sons were not slow to accept her challenge. Down from the hill of Rhaenys they rode, 700 knights in silvered steel, led by their grand captain, Sir Daemon Morrigan, also called Daemon the Devout. Let us not bandy words, Maegor told him. Swords will decide this matter. Sir Daemon agreed. The gods would grant victory to the man whose cause was just, he said. Let each side have 7 champions as it was done in Andalos of old. Can you find 6 men to stand beside you? For Aenys had taken the Kingsguard to Dragonstone and Maegor stood alone. The king turned to the crowd. Who will come and stand beside his king? he called. Many turned away in fear or pretended that they did not hear, for the prowess of the warrior's sons was known to all. But at last one man offered himself. No knight, but a simple man-at-arms who called himself Dick Bean. "I've been a king's man since I was a boy," he said. "I mean to die a king's man." Only then did the first knight step forward. "This Bean shames us all," he shouted. "Are there no true knights here? No leal men?" The speaker was Bernard Brune, the squire who had slain Harren the Red and been knighted by King Aenys himself. His scorn drove others to offer their swords. The names of the 4 Maegor chose are writ large in the history of Westeros. Sir Bram the Blackhull, a hedge knight, Sir Rayford Rosby, Sir Guy Lothston, and Sir Lucifer Massey, Lord of Stonedance. The names of the 7 warriors' sons have likewise come down to us. They were Sir Daemon Morrigan, called Daemon the Devout, Grand Captain of the warriors' sons, Sir Lyle Bracken, Sir Harris Hope, called Death's Head Harry, Sir Aegon Ambrose, Sir Dickon Flowers, the bastard of Beesbury, Sir William the Wanderer, and Sir Garibald of the 7 Stars, the Septon Knight. It is written that Daemon the Devout led a prayer, beseeching the warrior to grant strength to their arms. Afterward, the Queen Dowager gave the command to begin, and the issue was joined. Dick Bean died first, cut down by Lyle Bracken mere instants after the combat began. Thereafter, accounts differ markedly. Some say the fight went on for hours, others that most of the combatants were down and dying in mere moments. All agree that great deeds were done and mighty blows exchanged, until the end found Maegor Targaryen standing alone against Daemon the Devout and William the Wanderer. Both of the warrior's sons were badly wounded, and his grace had Blackfire in his hand. But even so, it was a near thing. Even as he fell, Sir William dealt the king a terrible blow to the head and cracked his helm and left him insensate. Many thought Maegor dead until his mother removed his broken helm. "The king breathes," she said. "The king lives." The victory was his. 7 of the mightiest of the warriors' sons were dead, including their commander, but more than 700 remained, armed and armored and gathered about the crown of the hill. Queen Visenya commanded her son to be taken to the maesters. As the litter-bearers bore him down the hill, the swords of the faith dropped to their knees in submission. The Dowager Queen ordered them to return their fortified sept atop the hill of Rhaenys. For 27 days, Maegor Targaryen lingered at the point of death, whilst maesters treated him with potions and poultices and septons prayed above his head. In the Sept of Remembrance, the warriors' sons prayed as well and argued about their course. Some felt the order had no choice but to accept Maegor as king, since the gods had blessed him with victory. Others insisted that they were bound by oath to obey the High Septon and fight on. On the 28th day after the trial of 7, a ship arrived from Pentos upon the evening tide, carrying 2 women and 600 sellswords. Alice of House Harroway, Maegor Targaryen's second wife, had returned to Westeros. But not alone. With her sailed another woman, a pale, raven-haired beauty known only as Tiana of the Tower. Some said the woman was Maegor's concubine. Others named her Lady Alice's paramour. The natural daughter of a Pentoshi magister, Tiana was a tavern dancer who had risen to be a courtesan. She was rumored to be a prisoner and sorceress as well. Many queer tales were told about her, yet as soon as she arrived, Queen Visenya dismissed her sons' maesters and septons and gave Maegor over to Tiana's care. Maegor's recovery quickly turned to horror, however, as Maegor flew Balerion to the hill of Rhaenys, setting the Sept of Remembrance alight as the warrior sons were at their morning prayers. Those that fled the inferno were slain by Maegor's waiting soldiers. 700 men died that day, and the order of the warrior sons would never again rise to its former glory. King Maegor's war against the Faith Militant had just begun, however. It would continue for the remainder of his reign. The king's first act upon ascending the Iron Throne was to command the poor fellows swarming toward the city to lay down their weapons under penalty of prescription and death. When his decree had no effect, his grace commanded all leal lords to take the field and disperse the faith's ragged hordes by force. In response, the High Septon in Old Town called upon true and pious children of the gods gods to take up arms in defense of the faith and put an end to the reign of dragons and monsters and abominations. That same year, Maegor's forces achieved victory over the faith militant in a battle at Stonebridge, and later in a battle at the Great Fork of Blackwater. Maegor personally fought in the latter battle, burning men on Balarion's back. Following these two victories, Maegor declared his intent to marry again, taking Tiana of the Tower as his third wife. Grand Maester Myros objected, stating that Maegor's one true wife awaited him at Hightower, for which Maegor beheaded him with Blackfire. Maegor wed Tiana on the hill of Aenys, surrounded by the remains of the warriors' sons who had died there. It was said Maegor had to execute a dozen septons before finding one willing to perform the ceremony. At Old Town, the High Septon loudly denounced the abomination and his whores, while Cerise continued to insist that she was Maegor's only lawful queen. In the early year of 43 AC, Maegor appointed Lord Lucas Harroway, father of his wife, Queen Alice, as his new hand. However, it was not the hand who had the king's ear. His grace might rule the Seven Kingdoms, men whispered, but he himself was ruled by the three queens. His mother, Queen Visenya, his paramour, Queen Alice, and the Pentoshi witch, Queen Tiana. Tiana was called the Mistress of Whisperers and the King's Raven for her black hair. It was said that she spoke with rats and spiders, and all the vermin of King's Landing came to her by night to tell tales of any fool rash enough to speak against the king. Construction of the Red Keep, which had begun in 35 AC, continued under Maegor's reign. Maegor focused on constructing secret passages and tunnels through the depths of Aegon's high hill and commanded the construction of a fortified castle within the castle, later known as Maegor's Holdfast. He also ordered 4 levels of dungeons to be constructed, with the 4th level built specifically for torture. Meanwhile, the warriors' sons had chosen a new Grand Captain in Sir Joffrey Doggett, the Red Dog of the Hills, who was determined to restore the order to its former glory. When Sir Joffrey set out from Lannisport to seek the blessing of the High Septon, 100 men rode with him. By the time he arrived in Old Town, so many knights, squires, and free riders had joined him that his numbers had swelled to 2,000. Elsewhere in the realm, other restless lords and men of faith were also gathering men and plotting ways to bring the dragons down. King Maegor let these tensions fester for almost half a year, so engrossed was he in the building of his Red Keep. It was his mother who struck first. The Dowager Queen mounted Vagar and brought fire and blood to the Riverlands as she once had to Dorne. In a single night, the seats of House Blaintree, House Terrick, House Teddings, House Leicester, and House Wayne were set aflame. Maegor himself then took wing, flying Balerion to the Westerlands, where he burned the castles of the Brooms, Falwells, Lorches, and other pious lords who had defied his summons. Lastly, he descended upon the seat of House Doggett, reducing it to ash. The fires claimed the lives of Sir Joffrey's father, mother, and younger sister, along with their sworn swords, servants, and livestock. As the pillars of smoke rose through the Westerlands and Riverlands, Vagar and Balerion turned south. It seems as if the greatest and most populous city in Westeros, Old Town, must surely burn. And the dragons came. Vagar appeared first as the sun rose, and Balerion just before midday. However, they found the city gates open, the battlements unmanned, and the banners of House Targaryen, House Tyrell, and House Hightower flying together atop the walls. The Dowager Queen Visenya was the first to learn the news. Sometime during the blackest hour of the night, the High Septon had died. At 53 years of age, he had been known for his strength, more than once preaching through day and night without rest. His sudden death shocked the city and dismayed his followers. The causes of his death are still debated. Some say the High Septon took his own life, either in fear of Maegor's wrath or as a sacrifice to save Old Town from dragonfire. Others claim the gods struck him down for pride, heresy, and treason. Many remained convinced he was murdered, but by whom? Some suspect Sir Morgan Hightower, who was seen entering the High Septon's chambers that night. Others point to Lady Patris Hightower, Lord Martin's aunt, and a reputed witch, or the archmaesters of the Citadel who exchanged messages with the Starry Sept all night. There are even those who lay the blame on Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen. The truth will likely never be known. However, Lord Martin Hightower's swift reaction is undeniable. He immediately ordered the arrest of the warrior's sons, including his brother. The city gates were opened and Targaryen banners raised. Even before Vagar's wings were sighted, the most devout were marched to the Starry Sept under guard to choose a new High Septon. The vote was unanimous. Septon Pater, 90 years old, blind and feeble, was chosen. When Maegor appeared before him in the Starry Sept, Pater blessed him as king, though he forgot parts of the blessing. Queen Visenya soon returned to Dragonstone with Vagar, but Maegor remained in Old Town for nearly half a year, holding court and presiding over trials. The captured warriors' sons were given a choice: renounce their allegiance and join the Night's Watch, or die as martyrs. 3/4 chose to take the black. The rest were executed. 7 famous knights were beheaded by Maegor himself, while the rest were executed by their former brothers-in-arms. Only Sir Morgan Hightower received a full royal pardon. The new High Septon formally dissolved both the warriors' sons and the poor fellows, commanding the faithful to lay down their arms. King Maegor allowed the remaining members of the faith militant until the end of the year to surrender. After that, a bounty was placed on their heads: a gold dragon for any warrior's son, and a silver stag for the scalp of a poor fellow. During his time in Old Town, the king reconciled with his first wife, Queen Ceres, the sister of Lord Hightower. Queen Ceres agreed to accept the king's other wives and speak no ill of them, while Maegor swore to restore her rights and privileges. A great feast was held at the Hightower to celebrate their reconciliation, including a bedding and second consummation, so all would know this was a true and loving union. How long King Maegor might have lingered at Old Town cannot be known, for in the latter part of 43 AC, another challenge to the throne arose. His Grace's long absence from King's Landing had not gone unnoticed by his nephew, and Prince Aegon was quick to seize the chance. Emerging at last from Casterly Rock, Aegon the Uncrowned and his wife Rhaena raced across the Riverlands with a handful of companions and entered the city concealed beneath sacks of corn. With so few followers, Aegon dared not seat himself upon the Iron Throne, for he knew he could not hold it. They were there for Rhaena's Dreamfire, and so the prince might claim his father's dragon, Quicksilver. In this bold endeavor, they were aided by friends in Maegor's own court who had grown weary of the king's cruelties. The prince and princess entered King's Landing in a wagon pulled by mules, but when they made their departure, it was on Dragonback, flying side by side. From there, Aegon and Rhaena returned to the Westerlands to assemble an army. As the Lannisters of Casterly Rock were still reluctant to openly espouse Prince Aegon's cause, his adherents gathered at Pinkmaiden Castle, seat of House Piper. John Piper, Lord of Pinkmaiden, had pledged his sword to the prince, but it was widely believed that it was his fiery sister Melanie, Rhaena's girlhood friend, who won him to the cause. It was there at Pinkmaiden that Aegon Targaryen, mounted on Quicksilver, descended from the sky to denounce his uncle as a tyrant and usurper, and call upon all honest men to rally to his banners. The lords and knights who came were largely Westermen and Riverlords. The lords Tarbeck, Root, Vance, Charlton, Frey, Page, Perrin, Farman, and Westerling were amongst them, together with Lord Corbay of the Vale, the bastard of Barrowton, and the fourth son of the Lord of Griffin's Roost. From Lannisport came 500 men under the banner of a bastard son of Lyman Lannister, Sir Tyler Hill, by which ploy the cunning Lord of Casterly Rock lent supporters to the young prince, whilst still keeping his own hands clean should Maegor prevail. The Piper levies were led not by Lord John or his brothers, but by their sister Melanie, who donned man's mail and took up a spear. 15,000 men had joined the rebellion as Aegon the Uncrowned began his march across the Riverlands to stake his claim to the Iron Throne, led by the prince himself on King Aenys' beloved dragon, Quicksilver. Though their ranks included seasoned commanders and puissant knights, no great lords had rallied to Prince Aegon's cause. But Queen Tiana, mistress of whisperers, wrote to warn Maegor that Storm's End, the Eyrie, Winterfell, and Casterly Rock had all been in secret communication with his brother's widowed queen, Alyssa. Before declaring for the Prince of Dragonstone, they wished to be convinced he might prevail. Prince Aegon required a victory. Maegor denied him that. From Harrenhal came forth Lord Harroway, from Riverrun Lord Tully. Sir Davos Starklyn of the Kingsguard marshaled 5,000 swords in King's Landing and struck out west to meet the rebels. Up from the Reach came Lord Peake, Lord Merryweather, Lord Caswell, and their levies. Prince Aegon's slow-moving host found armies closing from all sides, each smaller than their own force, but so many that the young prince, still but 17, did not know where to turn. Lord Corbray advised him to engage each foe separately before they could join their powers, but Aegon was loath to divide his strength. Instead, he chose to march on toward King's Landing. Just south of the God's Eye, he found Davos Darklyn's Kingslanderers athwart his path, sitting on high ground behind a wall of spears, even as scouts reported Lords Merryweather and Caswell advancing from the south, and Lords Tully and Harroway from the north. Prince Aegon commanded a charge, hoping to break through the Kingslanders before the other loyalists fell upon his flanks, and mounted Quicksilver to lead the attack himself. But scarce had he taken wing when he heard shouts and saw his men below pointing to where Balerion the Black Dread had appeared in the southern sky. King Maegor had come. For the first time since the doom of Valyria, dragon contended with dragon in the sky, even as battle was joined below. Quicksilver, a quarter the size of Balerion, was no match for the older, fiercer dragon, and her pale white fireballs were engulfed and washed away in great gouts of black flame. Then the Black Dread fell upon her from above, his jaws closing round her neck as he ripped one wing from her body. Screaming and smoking, the young dragon plunged to earth and Prince Aegon with her. The battle below was nigh as brief, if bloodier. Once Aegon fell, the rebels saw their cause was doomed and ran, discarding arms and armor as they fled. But the loyalist armies were all around them, and there was no escape. By day's end, 2,000 of Aegon's men had died against 100 of the king's. Half a year of trials and executions followed. Queen Visenya persuaded her son to spare some of the rebellious lords, but even those who kept their lives lost lands and titles and were forced to give up hostages. One notable name could be found neither amongst the dead nor the captive. Rhaena Targaryen, sister and wife to Prince Aegon, had not joined the host. Whether that was by his command or her own choice is still debated to this day. All that is known for certain is that Rhaena remained at Pink Maiden Castle with her daughters when Aegon marched, and with her, Dreamfire. Would the addition of a second dragon to the prince's host have made a difference when the battle was joined? We shall never know, though it has been pointed out, and rightly, that Princess Rhaena was no warrior, and Dreamfire was younger and smaller than Quicksilver, and certainly no true threat to Balerion the Black Dread. When word of the battle reached the west and the Princess Rhaena learned that both her husband and her friend Lady Melanie had fallen, it is said she heard the news in a stony silence. "Will you not weep?" she was asked, to which she replied, "I do not have the time for tears." Whereupon, fearing her uncle's wrath, she gathered up her daughters, Aeria and Rhaella, and fled further, first to Lannisport, and then across the sea to Fair Isle, where the new lord Mark Farman, whose father and elder brother had both perished in the battle, fighting for Prince Aegon, gave her sanctuary and swore no harm would come to her beneath his roof. For the best part of a year, the people of Fair Isle watched the east in dread, fearing the sight of Balerion's dark wings, but Maegor never came. Instead, the victorious king returned to the Red Keep, where he grimly set about getting himself an heir. The 44th year after the conquest was a peaceful one compared to what had gone before, but the maesters who chronicled those times wrote that the smell of blood and fire still hung heavy in the air. Maegor I Targaryen sat the Iron Throne as his Red Keep rose around him, but his court was grim and cheerless despite the presence of his 3 queens, or perhaps because of it. Each night he summoned one of his wives to his bed, yet still he remained childless, with no heir but for the sons and daughters of his brother, Aenys. Maegor the Cruel he was called, and Kinslayer as well, though it was death to say either in his hearing. On Dragonstone, the Dowager Queen Visenya had grown thin and haggard, the flesh melting from her bones. Queen Alyssa remained on the island as well, with her son Jaehaerys and her daughter Alysanne prisoners in all but name. Prince Viserys, the eldest surviving son of Aenys and Alyssa, was summoned to court by his grace. A promising lad of 15 years, beloved to the commons, Viserys was made squire to the king, with a Kingsguard knight for a shadow to keep him well away from plots and treasons. For a brief while in 44 AC, it seemed as if the king might soon have the son he desired so desperately. Queen Alyce announced she was with child, and the court rejoiced. Grand Maester Desmond confined her grace to her bed, as she grew great with child and took charge of her care, assisted by 2 septas, a midwife, and the queen's sisters Jane and Hannah. Maegor insisted that his other wives serve his pregnant queen as well. During the 3rd moon of her confinement, however, Lady Alyce began to bleed heavily from the womb and lost the child. When King Maegor came to see the stillbirth, he was horrified to find the boy a monster with twisted limbs, a huge head, and no eyes. "This cannot be my son," he roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury, and he ordered the immediate execution of the midwife and septas who had charge of the queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alyce's sisters. It is said that Maegor was seated on the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands, when Queen Tiana came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was not his seed. Seeing Queen Cerise return to court, old and bitter and childless, Alyce Haraway had begun to fear that the same fate awaited her unless she gave the king a son, so she had turned to her lord father, the Hand of the King. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Cerise or Queen Tiana, Lucas Haraway sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor refused to believe. He told Tiana she was a jealous witch and barren, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. "Spiders do not lie," the mistress of the Whisperers replied. She handed the king a list. Written there were the names of 20 men alleged to have given their seed to Queen Alyce. Old men and young, handsome men and homely ones, knights and squires, lords and servants, even grooms and smiths and singers. The king's hand had cast a wide net, it seemed. The men had only one thing in common. All were men of proven potency, known to have fathered healthy children. Under torture, all but 2 confessed. One, a father of 12, still had the gold paid him by Lord Haraway for his services. The questioning was carried out swiftly and secretly, so Lord Haraway and Queen Alyce had no inkling of the king's suspicions until the Kingsguard burst in on them. Dragged from her bed, Queen Alyce saw her sisters killed before her eyes as they tried to protect her. Her father, inspecting the Tower of the Hand, was flung from its roof to smash upon the stones below. Haraway's sons, brothers, and nephews were taken as well, thrown onto the spikes that lined the dry moat around Maegor's holdfast. Some took hours to die. The simple-minded Horace Haraway lingered for days. The 20 names on Queen Tiana's list soon joined them, and then another dozen men named by the first 20. The worst death was reserved for Queen Alyce herself, who was given over to her sister wife Tiana for torment. Her dying took the best part of a fortnight, and that Maegor himself was present for all of it, a witness to her agony. After her death, the queen's body was cut into 7 parts, and her pieces mounted on spikes above the 7 gates of the city, where they remained until they rotted. King Maegor himself departed King's Landing, assembling a strong force of knights and men-at-arms, and marching on Harrenhal to complete the destruction of House Haraway. The great castle on the God's Eye was lightly held, and its castellan, a nephew of Lord Lucas and cousin to the late queen, opened his gates at the king's approach. Surrender did not save him. His Grace put the entire garrison to the sword, along with every man, woman, and child he found to have any drop of Haraway blood. Then he marched to Lord Haraway's town on the Trident and did the same there. When at last Maegor returned to King's Landing to seat himself again upon the Iron Throne, he was greeted with the news that his mother, Queen Visenya, had died. Moreover, in the confusion that followed the death of the Queen Dowager, Queen Alyssa and her children had made their escape from Dragonstone with the dragons Vermithor and Silverwing, to where no man could say. They had even gone so far as to steal Dark Sister as they fled. His Grace ordered his mother's body burned, her bones and ashes interred beside those of the Conqueror. Then he sent his Kingsguard to seize his squire, Prince Viserys. "Chain him in a black cell and question him sharply," Maegor commanded. "Ask him where his mother has gone." "He may not know," protested Sir Owen Bush, a knight of Maegor's Kingsguard. "Then let him die," the king answered famously. "Perhaps the bitch will turn up for his funeral." Prince Viserys did not know where his mother had gone, not even when Tiana of Pentos plied him with her dark arts. After 9 days of questioning, he died. His body was left out in the ward of the Red Keep for a fortnight at the king's command. "Let his mother come and claim him," Maegor said. But Queen Alyssa never appeared, and at last his grace consigned his nephew to the fire. The prince was 15 years old when he was killed and had been much loved by small folk and lords alike. The realm wept for him. In 45 AC, construction finally came to an end on the Red Keep. King Maegor celebrated its completion by feasting the builders and workmen who had labored on the castle, sending them wagon loads of strong wine and sweetmeats, and whores from the city's finest brothels. The revels lasted for 3 days. Afterward, the king's knights moved in and put all the workmen to the sword to prevent them from ever revealing the Red Keep's secrets. Their bones were interred beneath the castle that they had built. Not long after the completion of the castle, Queen Cerise was stricken with a sudden illness and passed away. A rumor went around the court that her grace had given offense to the king with a shrewish remark, so he had commanded Sir Owen to remove her tongue. As the tale went, the queen had struggled, Sir Owen's knife had slipped, and the queen's throat had been slit. Though never proven, this story was widely believed at the time. Today, however, most maesters believe it to be a slander concocted by the king's enemies to further blacken his repute. Whatever the truth, the death of his first wife left Maegor with but a single queen, the black-haired, black-hearted Pentoshi woman Tiana, mistress of the spiders, who was hated and feared by all. Late in the year 45 AC, King Maegor took the field once again to continue his war against the outlawed remnants of the Faith Militant. In the great woods south of the Blackwater, the king's forces hunted down scores of poor fellows who had taken refuge there, sending many to the wall and hanging those who refused to take the black. Their leader, the woman known as Poxy Jane Poor, continued to elude the king until at last she was betrayed by 3 of her own followers who received pardons and knighthoods as their reward. In 46 AC, King Maegor returned to the Red Keep with 2,000 skulls, the fruits of a year of campaigning. They were the heads of poor fellows and warriors' sons, he announced, as he dumped them out beneath the Iron Throne. But it was widely believed that many of the grisly trophies belonged to simple crofters, field hands, and swineherds guilty of no crime but faith. The coming of the new year found Maegor still without a son, not even a bastard who might be legitimized, nor did it seem likely that Queen Tiana would give him the heir that he desired. Whilst she continued to serve his grace as mistress of whisperers, the king no longer sought her bed. It was past time to take a new wife, Maegor's counselors agreed, but they parted ways on who that wife should be. Grand Maester Bennifer suggested a match with the proud and lovely lady of Starfall, Clarice Dane, in the hopes of detaching her hands and house from Dorne. Alton Butterwell, Master of Coin, offered his widowed sister, a stout woman with 7 children. Though admittedly no beauty, he argued, her fertility had been proven beyond a doubt. The king's hand, Lord Saltagar, had 2 young maiden daughters, 13 and 12 years of age respectively. He urged the king to take his pick of them, or marry both if he preferred. Lord Valerian of Driftmark advised Maegor to send for his niece Rhaena, the widow of Aegon the Uncrowned. By taking her to wife, Maegor could unite their claims, prevent any fresh rebellions from gathering around her, and acquire a hostage against any plots her mother, Queen Alyssa, might foment. King Maegor listened to each man in turn. Though in the end he scorned most of the women they put forward, some of their arguments and reasons took root in him. He would have a woman of proven fertility, he decided, though not Butterwell's fat and homely sister. He would take more than one wife, as Lord Saltagar urged. 2 wives would double his chances of getting a son. 3 wives would triple it, and one of those wives should surely be his niece. There was wisdom in Lord Valerian's counsel. Queen Alyssa and her 2 youngest children remained in hiding. It was thought that they had fled across the narrow sea to Tyrosh or perhaps Volantis, but they still represented a threat to Maegor's crown and any son he might father. Taking Aenys' daughter to wife would weaken any claims put forward by her younger siblings. At the town of Stony Sept, Sept and Moon denounced King Maegor's wedding plans, and hundreds of townfolk cheered wildly, but few others dared to raise their voices against his grace. The High Septon took ship at Old Town, sailing to King's Landing to perform the marriage rites. On a warm spring day in the 47th year after the conquest, Maegor Targaryen took 3 wives in the ward of the Red Keep. Though each of his new queens was garbed and cloaked in the colors of her father's house, the people of King's Landing called them the Black Brides, for all were widows. In the aftermath of the wedding, Maegor declared Rhaenys' daughter Arya his lawful heir until such a time as the gods grant me a son, whilst sending her twin, Rhaella, to Old Town to be raised as a septa. His nephew Jaehaerys, the rightful heir by all the laws of the Seven Kingdoms, was expressly disinherited in the same decree. Queen Jane's son was confirmed as Lord Tarbeck Hall and sent to Casterly Rock to be raised as a ward of Lyman Lannister. Queen Eleanor's elder boys were similarly disposed of, one to the Eyrie, one to Highgarden. The queen's youngest babe was turned over to a wet nurse, as the king found the queen's nursing irksome. After a year later, Edwyl Celtigar, the king's hand, announced that Queen Jane was with child. Hardly had her belly began to swell when the king himself revealed that Queen Eleanor was also pregnant. Maegor showered both women with gifts and honors, and granted new lands and officers to their fathers, brothers, and uncles, but his joy proved to be short-lived. 3 moons before she was due, Queen Jane was brought to bed by a sudden onset of labor pains, and was delivered of a stillborn child as monstrous as the one Alis Harroway had birthed, a legless and armless creature possessed of both male and female genitalia. Nor did the mother long survive the child. Maegor was cursed, men said. He had slain his nephew, made war against the faith and the High Septon, defied the gods, committed murder and incest, adultery and rape. His privy parts were poisoned, his seed full of worms. The gods would never grant him a living son. Or so the whispers ran. Maegor himself settled on a different explanation and sent Sir Owen Bush and Sir Maladon Moore to seize Queen Tyanna and deliver her to the dungeons. There the Pentoshi queen made a full confession, even as the king's torturers readied their implements. She had poisoned Jane Westerling's child in the womb, just as she had Alis Harroway's. It would be the same with Eleanor Costain's whelp, she promised. It is said that the king slew her himself, cutting out her heart with blackfire and feeding it to his dogs. But even in death, Tyanna of the Tower had her revenge, for it came to pass just as she had promised. The moon turned and turned again, and in the black of night, Queen Eleanor too was delivered of a malformed and stillborn child, an eyeless boy born with rudimentary wings. That was in the 48th year after the conquest. The 6th year of King Maegor's reign and the last year of his life. No man in the 7 kingdoms could doubt that the king was accursed now. What followers still remained to him began to melt away, evaporating like dew in the morning sun. Word reached King's Landing that Sir Joffrey Doggett had been seen entering Riverrun, not as a captive but as a guest of Lord Tully. Sept and Moon appeared once more, leading thousands of the faithful on a march across the reach to Old Town, with the announced intent of bearding the lickspittle in the Starry Sept to demand that he denounce the abomination on the Iron Throne and lift his ban on the military orders. When Lord Oakhart and Lord Rowan appeared before him with their levies, they came not to attack Moon, but to join him. Lord Celtigar resigned as king's hand and returned to his seat on Claw Isle. Reports from the Dornish marches suggested that the Dornishmen were gathering in their passes, preparing to invade the realm. And soon, when word reached the Red Keep that Jaehaerys was gathering his forces at Storm's End, Rhaena Targaryen mounted Dreamfire and flew to join him, abandoning the uncle she had been forced to wed. She took her daughter, Arya, and Blackfire, stolen from the king's own scabbard as he slept. King Maegor's response was sluggish and confused. He commanded the Grand Maester to send forth his ravens, summoning all his leal lords and bannermen to gather at King's Landing, only to find that Bennifer had taken ship for Pentos. Finding Princess Aeria gone, he sent a rider to Old Town to demand the head of her twin sister Rhaella to punish their mother for her betrayal. But Lord Hightower imprisoned his messenger instead. Two of his Kingsguard vanished one night to go over to Jaehaerys, and Sir Owen Bush was found dead outside a brothel, his members stuffed into his mouth. Lord Valerian of Driftmark was amongst the first to declare for Jaehaerys. As the Valerians were the realm's traditional admirals, Maegor woke to find he had lost the entire royal fleet. The Tyrells of Highgarden followed with all the power of the Reach. The Hightowers of Old Town, the Redwinds of the Arbor, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Arryns of the Eyrie, the Royces of Runestone. One by one, they came out against the king. In King's Landing, a score of lesser lords gathered at Maegor's command, amongst them Lord Darklyn of Duskendale, Lord Massey of Stonedance, Lord Towers of Harrenhal, Lord Staunton of Rook's Rest, Lord Bar Emmon of Sharp Point, Lord Buckwell of the Antlers, the Lords Rosby, Stokeworth, Hayford, Hart, Birch, Rollingford, Bywater, and Mallory. Yet they scarce commanded 4,000 men amongst them all, and only 1 in 10 of those were knights. Maegor brought them together in the Red Keep one night to discuss his plan of battle. When they saw how few they were and realized that no great lords were coming to join them, many lost heart, and Lord Hayford went so far as to urge his grace to abdicate and take the Black. His grace ordered Hayford beheaded on the spot and continued the war council with his lordship's head mounted on a lance behind the Iron Throne. All day the lords made plans, and late into the night, it was the hour of the wolf when at last Maegor allowed them to take their leave. The king remained behind, brooding on the Iron Throne as they departed. Lord Towers and Lord Rosby were the last to see his grace. Hours later, as dawn was breaking, the last of Maegor's queens came seeking after him. Queen Eleanor found him still upon the Iron Throne, pale and dead, his robes soaked through with blood. His arms had been slashed open from wrist to elbow on jagged barbs, and another blade had gone through his neck to emerge beneath his chin. Many to this day believe it was the Iron Throne itself that killed him. Maegor was alive when Rosby and Towers left the throne room, they argue, and the guards at the doors swore that no one entered afterward, until Queen Eleanor made her discovery. Some say it was the queen herself who forced him down onto those barbs and blades to avenge the murder of her first husband. The King's Guard might have done the deed, though that would have required them to act in concert, as there were 2 knights posted at each door. It might also have been a person or persons unknown, entering and leaving the throne room through some hidden passage. The Red Keep has its secrets, known only to the dead. It might also be that the king tasted despair in the dark watches of the night and took his own life, twisting the blades as needed and opening his veins to spare himself the defeat and disgrace that surely awaited him. The reign of King Maegor I Targaryen, known to history and legend as Maegor the Cruel, lasted 6 years and 66 days. Upon his death, his corpse was burned in the yard of the Red Keep, his ashes interred afterward on Dragonstone beside those of his mother. He died childless and left no heir of his body.